So today I wanted to talk to you about this, SAGA, which is a fairly popular Dark Age skirmish game. And I recently got a copy of it as a gift, for which I'm very lucky, because first off, this is very expensive. And to get that, and with that said, let's start off with the review. It's not quite a proper review, it's more of a first impression. I haven't gotten the chance to actually play SAGA yet. I was hoping to, but unfortunately nobody at my local gaming club happened to be able to play SAGA, or at least not, all the SAGA players were busy, and I'm leaving for my university tomorrow, so I won't have time to fix this. So this is just first impressions of the rules. I haven't actually played SAGA itself yet. So like I said, the first thing is it is very expensive. I was lucky enough to get this as a gift, so I didn't actually pay anything for it. But whoever did buy me this wonderful present was, I think, around 40 bucks for this rule set. Compare that to all sorts of other fun skirmish games. For instance, there is Brettenwalda, which is perhaps my favorite skirmish game, or my favorite published official skirmish game. There's a few like homebrews I like more, and that's free. Guts is a great homebrew style game. Its entire rules fits on a single sheet of paper. That is also free. But of course you don't want to hear about all these free ones. By the way, I will leave links in the descriptions to those free ones. You want to hear about all these other purchased ones. Like this, which is the only non-free Dark Age war game I have, which is Dux Bellorum. This is around a little under 20 bucks. I think it reaches 20 bucks once I paid shipping. So this is about half the price, and this is also a very good rule set. This is wargaming more than skirmish gaming. To say what I mean by that, skirmish gaming tends to be smaller scale. You know, a handful of soldiers, usually almost always under 100, usually under like 50, 75, where you focus on individual soldiers. This would be small things like, a cattle raid or something like that. Whereas when I say wargaming, these tend to be big unit-based systems where, a platoon moves together, and these will reenact or enact larger scale battles, like actual field battles where you have armies of a few hundred soldiers, that is. So that's more of a war game, and I do have a few not Dark Age-y skirmish games as well. Beer and Pretzels. This I also got very cheap. This is relatively modern. Then you have Trench Wars, World War I game, also considerably cheaper. I haven't tried out either of those more modern ones. The big kicker, though, is this comparatively large book, The Lord of the Rings Strategy Battle Game. This is actually the game that first introduced me to tabletop gaming. It is a skirmish game set in, as you might have guessed, Tolkien's Middle-earth world. So, you reenact battles from The Lord of the Rings, and they have orcs and elves and goblins and Gondor and all that good stuff. All the armies you want to play are in here. This, I can't remember the price exactly. I do remember it was less than 40. It might have only been 30 or 35, so not that much less. But this is cheaper than SAGA. And to compare it, they are about the same size. SAGA is very slightly taller and nowhere near as thick. So if we're saying these are about the same price, Lord of the Rings was a much better deal. SAGA has the rules, including some information on armies. This has the rules, some information on armies. It has scenarios, it has guides on how to paint, how to make scenery, how to modify your figures, do conversions. It has printouts on how to make, walls and stuff. Just something else this rule has. In its rules for how to play, it includes, giant monsters like, elephants and stuff. It has walls, it has siege equipment, it has all sorts of fun stuff that aren't in the SAGA rules. So this has more rules and a lot more non-rules. This was a much better deal for the same price as SAGA. And of course, you're not done paying for SAGA yet once you get the rules. So whereas Most games tend to use, fairly standard dice. Brettenwald, if I remember correctly, uses almost exclusively six-sided dice, and all sorts of other stuff. So usually just use, the dice you would have laying around that any tabletop gamer would have. Not so with Saga. You were supposed to buy these special SAGA dice to roll. And that gives you how to move your army around, what abilities to do. It does actually have a rather helpful chart that I can't seem to find right now that tells you how to replace those dice with, here it is, the SAGA dice. That does tell you how to replace, let's see if I can get that, how to replace your standard six-sided dice with special SAGA dice. But unless you want to keep flipping back and forth between this chart, perhaps have a little printout with you, they really do want you to buy more SAGA dice, which are relatively expensive. Gripping Beast, which is the company that makes this, or the company that has a deal with the studio that makes this, I guess, also has their own line of SAGA figures. These are, again, tremendously expensive compared to generic historical figures. Luckily, everyone I talked to, and I did talk to a few people online about SAGA, nobody seems to really care about what figures you use, which helps me a lot. Whereas compared to games like Warhammer or Warhammer 40k, where everyone wants you to use, the exact figures that are made by the company, most Saga players seem to be perfectly fine with generic historical miniatures. So perhaps some sort of cheating by bringing this up. But they also do have a tremendously expensive line of historical figures made specifically for Saga. So that's the first thing you'll notice compared to other games. This is very expensive. It's a lot of money. So if you do want to get into Saga, be prepared to throw down a decent amount of cash compared to just about any other historical game. So now that I've ranted about the price for almost 5 minutes now, perhaps even a little more than 5 minutes, let's talk about the rules. The actual good stuff. So the rules. First off, is this a skirmish game? Not really. If you use my definition of a skirmish game, there's not really an official one. I've speculated on it earlier in this video. Small scale with soldiers acting individually. Lloyd, who runs the Lindybiege channel, has a fairly good essay on what makes skirmish gaming. I'll leave that in the description. And his thought generally agrees with me. This, by that definition, is a weird hybrid of skirmish and wargaming. I don't really like it. Perhaps other people will. So why do I say this? Well, it definitely is smaller scale. Your average army will have between 25 to 70 some units. You could always increase or decrease the point value that you want to use for armies, but they recommend using 6 points, which gives you between 25 and I think 76 units. I'm not quite sure on that upper limit. It's somewhere in around the mid-70s. So the scale is relatively appropriate for skirmish gaming, but everything acts in units. So you get those many figures, and you place them around, and they have to be in what they call the very small distance of measurement. That's something I found kind of annoying. They give you these measuring sticks in the rule set, which you need to copy out on cardstock or something, or perhaps just tear out this page, and use that to measure the distance for moving units and firing bows and all that stuff, rather than just saying 2 inches or 5 centimeters or something. So you can just get a measuring tape. So they do give it to you for free, so perhaps I shouldn't complain. But it is something that I just found kind of annoying. And I have one more step to do. And hey, look at that. This amazing high quality print just came apart while I was talking. So this is great. Live, this is not intentional, that just sort of happened. So hooray for 40 bucks worth. I've had this since middle school, and it is, fairly beat up. Still together. Again, about the same price range. This fell apart in a week and a half. This is together from, I don't know, almost half a decade now at least. Probably more so, now that I think about it. Around maybe 7 or 8 years off the top of my head, I'm not really sure. So anyways. So yes, that was kind of annoying. And every unit, they can't act individually. They have to be in a unit. So your figure can't run off and do something on his own. He has to be in what they call very small distance between at least 3 other figures to make a unit. Or at least 3 other figures at the start of the game. As figures die, that'll get lessened. You can't add, or you can't combine units. As far as I saw, there was no rules for this. So you can't combine units, or if you have, like a unit with 12 people, you can't separate that into multiple units. Your units are just sort of stuck there, very much like a war game. They do have to be within very small distance, not touching. Which, very small distance is what I estimated, about 2 inches across. So you have to do that, and so this is about 2 inches, or about twice the distance as a base for the recommended scale, based off of the official published ones. They have a base that's about 1 inch across. So it's about 2 base lengths between each figure to be in a unit. Which, sounds reasonable enough. It's a skirmish game. People will separate a bit. If it's, not quite in shield walls and stuff with such a small scale. So, yes, that's perhaps reasonable. But people can't move or shoot in those gaps. So again, this is about 2 base lengths apart. You can't move through that or shoot through that. Using the scale, I estimated that it is about 8 feet, that 2 inches. Because if you think, a person's about the height of a person, so between 5 and 6 feet, perhaps 5.5 and 6 feet realistically, is one person. That's a little bit more than 1 inch. And when I was using the figures, I made my spears about 2 inches. So perhaps it's really up to me, but I'm estimating that's about 2 inches is about 8 feet. Plus, you have about 4 feet for the base, half of 8. So that means that with 4 figures, which is the smallest unit you can have, which means nobody can go in through and out these 4 figures and cover an area of 40 feet, about. So just think about that for a while. 40 feet for 4 figures. 4 men can make an impassable barrier across 40 feet. That just doesn't make sense. So that's something I found kind of annoying. And I say impassable, not just movement, but again shooting. You can't shoot people behind them, or if you have archers behind them, you can't shoot between those gaps. So 4 men create basically a wall 40 feet across. This is insane. So if you live in sort of your standard suburban house, your backyard is probably a smaller distance than can be covered by 4 men in SAGA. So yes, that's very much annoyed me, the way that these units are solid walls that can be spread out so much. Yes, these units, they also always act together. They always move together. If one unit is affected by, uneven terrain, everyone is. So again, you can be around 36 feet away from a unit, from a soldier in difficult terrain, you're still slowed down. And that's but again, that's sort of the smallest unit spread out as much as it can. If everyone shoots, everyone has to shoot. Casualties are also taken from units, not by figures. So, if I have, say, a line, or a column of people, not a line, of 5 people deep, and they're guarding this narrow pass, so there's 1 person in front and 4 people behind him, and he is in combat with somebody who's trying to get through this pass. Let's say the short spot is only 1 person deep. So once that first person dies, the enemy can rush in and you don't have that bottlenecking effect. Because it is taken by the casualties, this 5 person, who again can be spread out over this point around 50 feet, can just take casualties off the rear of the unit. So you can fight with somebody, kill someone 50 feet behind him. That doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. So create this bottlenecking effect and stuff. It's very easy to break the rules. The rules don't lend themselves to being realistic in that way. And it's not just the rules themselves, which are kind of unrealistic, but specifically the way you use units. So you don't just move units like you do in most other games where you have a phase where you just move all your units. Or, you move a unit and then the enemy uses a unit. It's not quite that manner. 1 second. Instead, you have these, which is where you roll those special, decently expensive SAGA dice. So this is the Welsh one, and you have to roll a dice, your SAGA dice, and each SAGA dice can then be used to apply. So, the Vikings have one. The standard SAGA set comes with Vikings, Welsh, Anglo-Danish, and Normans. If you want to play other units, so if you want to be the Irish, like I want to, that is another decently expensive, actually say decently expensive, I think it was only like 15 or 20 bucks off the top of my head, I'm not sure though, to get extra rules for how to play other units. So that I found that kind of annoying. But yes, and you use your SAGA dice to use to make movements, but you can also do them to get bonuses. So, for instance, the Normans have a charge ability, which gives extra attack to cavalry units when they're in combat. Which, at first you think, okay, that makes kind of sense. You spend some points to make a bonus. But it's very video gamey, which is sort of the ultimate reason why SAGA left a bad taste in my mouth. Was it does feel very video gamey. So the charge ability is just a power-up you give your units rather than... So rather than moving a unit, you give a little pew power-up to your cavalry. That represents them charging into combat. Note they don't have to charge, though. So if you have been locked in combat for 3 rounds, your cavalry charges the full 0 feet to stay in combat. And again, you're sacrificing movement. Again, from a gameplay perspective, might sort of make sense, but not in any significant way. It doesn't make sense in a realistic manner, is what I think I'm trying to get at. It doesn't represent combat as it exists. Same thing with being able to take your casualties from units, from people that weren't actually fighting, from people 50 feet away from the action, but the sword stroke, lapped all that distance and got killed. So yes, you can just sort of do pew power-ups on all your units rather than moving them. And some of these power-ups get weird. So like I said, charge, it's sort of easy to break, but hey, it's not anything that I can really complain about too much on its own. Whereas, compare some of these. Discard these dice to immediately remove from the game 1 enemy unit of warriors or levies with 3 models or less. A great big chasm just opens up behind them, or opens up under them, and the earth swallows up a unit. It's a power-up that just destroys 3 random figures. 3 soldiers just poof, go away. It's like a god power in Age of Mythology or something. It doesn't reflect anything near as much, anything nearly realistic when you can just, make units disappear. The trolls jump out of the woods and eat them and then jump back in the woods or something. And there's all sorts of weird things like this. Like there's one where you add fatigue to a random unit. They might have done absolutely nothing and hung in the back in reserves, but suddenly I got so tired from all this waiting to do something. All this nothing I've done made me tired. It's very easy. It feels like, again, power-ups and your special god abilities in a video game. It's not realistic to any sort of fighting, from really any period. Were you able to just, summon the trolls to just swallow up a bunch of units and then poof back into nothing, make units randomly tired, charge from 0 distance to attack somebody who was already in combat. It feels very video gamey. So it doesn't really reflect reality at all. It's not really a skirmish game, and in order to have this mess, you have to pay a hefty amount of money to really get into it. So yes, the first impressions were fairly poor. And I think that video gaming aspect is really what drives it. It doesn't feel like I'm in any way recreating a Dark Age battle. It feels like I'm playing a computer game where they just replaced the computer with me having to roll dice and do math. Which, isn't really why I play tabletop games. If I wanted to play a video game, I have Age of Mythology. I bought this specifically because I didn't want to play Age of Mythology. I wanted to get out all my prettily painted figures and have a realistic recreation of a Dark Age battle. Now you could of course fix some of these. You could just say, no special abilities, we won't use those, it makes it more realistic. And home rule a bunch of times this game. But this is perhaps a bit of a cop-out on both for that answer and my response to it, which is, I don't want to. I don't want to have to go through and rewrite all these rules for Saga. Now I have actually written my own rules, my own skirmish rules. It is called Cattle Raid. It has a nice fancy cover that I printed out fairly cheaply. This is a skirmish game for Dark Age Britain, pre-Viking Britain. So, post-Roman period, the Arthurian period, basically. So yes, and so this is my own rules. And I spent a few months making this, and I played with a few of my mates at college, and I have been updating it. So I have back here my notes, which are all sorts of fun, handwritten notes on things I want to change, things I want to get rid of, things I want to add for the rules. So when I say I don't want to change it, it's not because I'm lazy and don't want to do work. I have done a lot of work on writing a rule system I like. The reason why I would buy Saga when I have, again, this wonderful, crafting thing I made, my own little personal rule system that I think is a lot better, well then why buy Saga or something like that? And it's because I want to be able to sit down and play. Cattle Raid, as I said, it's not published, it's known to me and a few of my friends, and that's it. So if I want to go into a random hobby shop and say, I have, Dark Age figures, let's play something. If I say Cattle Raid, nobody's going to know what that is. I want to have something where I can, something that's big, where you can sit down and play universally. As soon as I start homebrewing rules, it takes that away, because it's no longer the game that I can sit down and have a game with sort of anyone who happens to be at my gaming club. And it becomes instead something that I have to explain again, defeating the purpose of spending all this money. I spend the money to have the convenience of sitting down and gaming with anyone who's there. As soon as that's not possible, I just sort of wasted money that I could have used for anything else and used a homebrewed system I like more. So yes, while I haven't actually played a game, and that will, to some, and even to me a bit, sort of invalidate my opinion. I really do want to test this out, even with this very bad taste it's leaving in my mouth. But yes, that's my first impression. It feels very video gamey, and it's not really a skirmish game. So hopefully, once I get around to sitting at a table and playing this, I'll realize that it's a lot better than I had thought, and that it really does deserve all the praise it gets. But my first impression, it's not that great. In fact, I don't really like it that much at all, based off of, again, just the first impression without playing. So if you do like Saga, please leave in the comments below why you disagree with me, what makes this game a really good game, because it does seem to have quite a big fan base, so I want to hear why it does, although, maybe not phrased in quite as an insulting term, but, what makes it so good, when I clearly don't like it as much. And if you agree with me, also feel free to leave that in the comments. But I would love to hear all of your opinions on Saga. If you have any other sort of tabletop games you would want me to check out, leave recommendations below as well. Thanks for watching. Something else I realized. I realized I had put this, or I had forgotten to put this into my initial review, which is why the camera angles and stuff has changed, and this is after I said goodbye. But you also have almost no unit flexibility. So you have three types of units. You have your Hearthguard, which are like your elite troops, your warriors, which are your standard troops, and your levies, which are your weak troops. And they all come standard equipped. You will never have a levy who is not armed with a bow, javelin, or sling. They will always be armed with a bow, javelin, or sling, and that's the way it is. You can never have a levy with a spear. You will never have a levy with a shield. Just sort of end of story, that's the way it works. Same thing with warriors. With the exception of the Welsh, warriors will never have ranged weapons. Hearthguards will never have ranged weapons. That's just, again, the way the system works. So you will, if you wanted to have, your Vikings have Franciscas or something, which historically they did, well, sucks for you, you're out of luck. Your warriors, you can't give them that. Same thing with javelins. We see warriors will foot and mounted on the Normans using javelins. Well, too bad your knights can't use javelins. Yes, they did it historically. Yes, it makes a lot of sense they would do it. Yes, you would probably want to do that, but you can't. Too bad. Sucks for you. And then same thing with, big two-handed axes. If you are the Anglo-Danish, I believe, your warlord has to have a two-handed axe. Can't have a shield, can't have a sword, can't have all this other stuff. Two-handed axe or nothing. Sucks to be you if you didn't want that. I guess you have to pick another army. And their warriors can also have two-handed axes. That is the only choice, as far as I can tell, on what your warriors are equipped with. Is if you are Anglo-Danish, you can choose to give your warriors either a weapon and shield or two-hand axe. That is the only choice you will get with equipment, with the exception of mounting troops, which actually didn't go into a lot of details. It says some units can be mounted, and they get extra movement. Well, does it cost more? Does it cost less? What does that mean other than they can be on horse? You don't know. We may never know. Actually, I'm sure it's in the expansions somewhere they give more information on cavalry. But the main rules, it's just some people get on horse because reasons, and then they move faster, and that's it. So you have those two choices. Are the only ones. Some armies, not all armies, but some of them. I think the Normans, and I want to say the Welsh. I'm not sure though. But the Normans can ride horses. A few others can ride horses as well. The Vikings, no cavalry. I don't think the Anglo-Danish had cavalry either, but I'm not sure. So sometimes, some of your units you can choose to put on horses. And if you are the Anglo-Danish, you can decide to give your warriors, but only your warriors and Hearthguards, you again don't get that choice with your warlord, to have two-handed axes. That's it. So there's no equipment that you can, you have no flexibility. All warriors are exactly the same, with the exception of the Welsh. The Welsh have less armor, but they all get javelins. And you can't undo that if you want to be Welsh, which is kind of annoying. So, on one hand you can say, oh, pick the army you want to be, but I don't like that explanation. You have zero flexibility with your equipment. So especially if you don't want to spend a bunch of money getting new figures. So in all my other games, I play Celtic peoples, because I like Celtic peoples. So I usually play as, the Irish when I'm doing my Cattle Raid, which is my self-made game, or Brettonwalda, or all these other games with Dark Age peoples. I like to be the Irish, or the Picts, or something like that. So with Brettonwalda, that means I play the Welsh, because I don't want to put down a bunch of money for a game I'm not a terrible fan of, to be able to play the Irish. So it is, yes, I could not do that. I could, for instance, go out and rebuy a bunch of figures so they are Saxons rather than Celtic, or something like that. So if you already have figures, you sort of get shoehorned into your army, which means zero equipment flexibility. Or almost zero equipment flexibility. That is very annoying. So, your standard levies will always be equipped with ranged weapons. They will never not be equipped with ranged weapon. Every army, they have the ranged weapons. With the exception of the Welsh, every non-levy will not have ranged weapons. Impossible to just they can't hold it. It turns to putty. It bends away. They can't grasp it. It just poof. There's no options there. Even though we know that Dark Age armies would almost always have some sort of ranged weapons. Wars would always have javelins or franciscas or, some other form of ranged weapons, even if it's just a rock. Every Roman soldier was trained how to throw a rock, how to use a sling, how to throw a javelin, and that sort of training didn't really go away. The Franks loved the various Roman training manuals. And, we know the Vikings, if you read their sagas, they're throwing spears, they're throwing axes. And the same thing with, Saxon chronicles and Saxon epics. Everyone's usually throwing weapons, but nope, you can't give that to your wards. It might be more realistic. You might think it's more fun. Well, then you have to play the Welsh. Sorry, sucks to be you. There's also, doesn't really seem to be spears. So yeah, some of the figures they give you will be equipped with spears. But there's no benefit to using spears. You can't back up units like you could in the Lord of the Rings strategy game. You can't fight from a longer distance like in my rules. You can't fight off cavalry better. So spears exist in some nether realm. But yeah, you can have a figure with spears, but nothing. It doesn't change anything rules-wise. So every warrior and Hearthguard, etc., and warlord, with the exception of the Anglo-Danish Anglo-Danish, will be equipped with sword and shield. If you are Anglo-Danish, then you have the option, with the exception of warlord, where you have to use a two-handed axe. If you are Welsh, they will also have javelins, and they will have weak armor. And there's nothing you can do to fix this, without, again, modifying the rules and then losing the benefit of paying $40 for a rule system rather than a free one, or a less popular one and making your own. There is zero equipment flexibility in this game. You are locked into whatever army you pick, and depending on what figures you have available, you might be locked into an army. That was something else that really bothered me, really annoyed me. In the rule system, they explain this as, we're simplifying the point system so that, you don't have to worry about creating your own army. But it really just limits you a lot, where every unit is exactly the same. Viking warriors will always be exactly like every other Viking warrior, which will always be exactly like every Norman warrior. And, the Viking levies will be exactly the same as the Norman levies, which will be exactly the same as the Anglo-Danish levies, which will be exactly the same as the Welsh levies, with zero flexibility between all of them. Everything is so cookie cutter, and it again reminds me of a video game where everyone just purchases archers and you can't build your own army. So I found that kind of annoying. There's zero equipment flexibility. So I think that is actually my last point. Thanks for watching.